The Story That Wrote Itself by A.M. Melfa. Chapter 2. In the quiet hours of darkling, Eustace tumbled akimbo through a tortured dream that seemed to last for aeons. Two dark, faceless entities slid through cracks of his bucolic dreaming, and like foul drovers harried him forth through the lands of nameless nightmare. First he was chased into a dead land of ancient dishonor where scattered crumbling ruins described destruction by conflagration. He trudged through the heavy ash of annihilation, the weight of vanished civilizations dragging at his feet. Nowhere could he find hydration or sustenance, and was doomed to wander the waste under the stilted rays of a setting sun frozen in the act of repose. The flow of time was arrested when the sun was stopped, and Eustace passed generations of man locked alone in this horrid desolation. Confounded and trapped inside his own helplessness, Eustace sank into the gray drifts of these accursed nations and fell asleep within his sleeping. No sooner had his eyes shut to the devastation of a forgotten millennia than the duo of pursuing malignancy returned to eject him from this small reprieve. Eustace was flung into the vast frozen wastes where his wailing pleas for deliverance were subsumed by the howling gales of forevermore. The twin demons joined with the voice of the cyclone, screeching infernal glee that shook his very marrow. On the knife's edge of an endless moment, Eustace was snagged upon a jagged tail of Aurora, the Borealis snatching him up and shredding his soul to ribbons with its razor-keen kaleidoscope. Gorgeous eddies of morphing color dissected his being and flung the fraying tatters into the throat of the wind. Cycling through a wheel of deconstruction and reconstruction, the rainbow tempest buffeted his very DNA across the sheer of space-time, at last delivering his belabored corporality back into the hands of his evil tormentors. The demons drove him remorselessly ahead of them, hunting his tender soul like tasty prey through an endless merry-go-round of damned and forgotten cities, whose peoples practiced grisly rites and gave the entirety of their beings over to the undying spawn of decay. Hollowed out and raised clean of sanity and self, Eustace lost sight of Eustace and saw the wisdom of succumbing to this merciless inundation of doom. At the very instant of his resignation, Eustace was again seized by his pestilent oppressors and flung across the disintegrating globe to land violently, still very much imprisoned within the cage of his humanity. He unfolded his broken body and slowly came erect in a series of short, painful jerks. Casting his dreaming eyes over the scene, the dim aspect of an alien boneyard hovered behind the granular particulate of shadow. The grave markers were of gargantuan proportion as they leaned a precarious lurch across the murky horizon. This field of death stretched out before his view in an unending sprawl, and Eustace knew himself to be standing in the very necropolis of eternity. Certain his terrible stalkers had delivered him unto his end. He deposited himself in the shade of a tottering obelisk to calmly await his fate, yet nowhere were the hounds of hell to be seen. Knowing himself to be dreaming, Eustace attempted to shock his mind into waking, for surely he was past exhaustion from this harrowing night terror. He began rocking back and forth, a bedlam maneuver to be sure, which seemed wholly appropriate under the circumstances. Faster and faster, stronger, with more violence, he flung his body until his skull made a crunching impact with the void black obelisk directly behind. His hand reached around to investigate and came back in front of his eyes red, a stark contrast from the litany of black tones comprising this plaguing dream. The smell of metal hit his nose and his eyes watered from the astringent vapor. With the letting of lifeblood, the multitude of dead populating the endless plains of mortuary instantaneously arose. All about him gray, sooty dross boiled and spewed like a million resurgent volcanoes. Bones concertinaed through gaps, trying to snag him up and draw him down. Yet somehow, through the strange operation of dreaming, Eustace was already on his feet and tearing blindly through this panoply of death. The eternal dead dragged their disintegration after him, freeing hands to scurry along without arms, feet without legs, torsos without heads, heads without eyes, tracking him along those fields of perpetual decay. A typhoon of cadaverous limbs encircled him, calciferous joints tearing open a trillion minute blood welts across his defeated, sagging form. Surging and teeming, boiling like a raging cauldron of molten decomposition, the dead descended upon him as maggots to corrupt flesh. Just when Eustace believed that his flesh, indeed, his very life force, was to be flensed from his knowing, the maelstrom crashed to a full stop. Sobbing and disgorging snot, uncaring, Eustace drew his hands down from his face and forced his eyes to open. He was not greeted by the sight of his bedroom at daybreak. No soft, warm glow bathed him from high windows covered in peach-colored curtains. No soothing sounds of low, sweet breathing from his love, his husband Claude. No, this wretched, hateful dream was not done with him yet. Instead of the sight of his placid bedroom sanctuary and the lulling sounds of his sleeping husband, Eustace's sight was caught by a vision of his mother, her putrescent face a fraction of an inch from his own. Her reedy, sibilant voice struggled to vent past the terrible wad of craggy, serrated toast protruding from a mouth now devoid of lips. But the blockage that terminated her life was too long solidified to allow speech. Eustace was momentarily relieved until her long, delicate forefinger, denuded of flesh, raised to her son's quailing visage, fixing him to the spot, brandishing his sin. End of chapter 2.